Real Estate Dojo. Today's topic, team, is about traditional closing versus a subject to closing, okay? I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give you a quick overview what a traditional closing is. Then I'll show you a diagram so you can see one visual and one audio, okay? So let's go with the audio first. Number one, what happens at closing with a traditional? So when you list your house with a realtor or when you buy a house with a realtor, this is what happens at the very end, okay? At closing. So at closing, the seller, person that has the house for sale, is going to deed over or convey or transfer the title of the property to the buyer. Alright? That's what's going to happen. Now, before the seller deeds over the title, the buyer needs to give the seller cash to do that. And since the buyer doesn't have the cash, that's why the whole thing's happen in escrow, okay? And so therefore the buyer needs to get money from the lender. So the next thing that's going to happen is that number two is that the buyer's lender will give the cash to the buyer under two circumstances. Number one, the buyer needs to give the buyer's lender a note or sign a promissory note that says he or she will pay to the lender X amount of dollars a month for X amount of terms at this interest rate and other terms in there. The second thing that the buyer has to do to the lender, so before the lender will fund the buyer the money to buy the new house, is that the buyer needs to sign a collateral security instrument that pledges the property that he's going to buy voluntarily as collateral in case the buyer defaults to the lender. Okay, so the buyer is forced to sign a deed of trust. Okay, that allows the lender to put a lien on the house at the county clerk's office. And if the buyer does not sign the note and does not sign the deed, then the lender will not give the buyer any money. So once the buyer signs the note, signs the deed of trust, the lender will fund the money, the cash, to the buyer, which then the buyer will go ahead and give it to the seller. Okay? And normally the seller will then have to get some of that money to the lender, and the difference between the debt and the cost of selling the house, the remaining is called equity, and I'll explain to you in the diagram a lot better, and I've already explained to you many times in the other videos. So just to remember, buyer's lender will give the cash to the buyer, then the cash is given to the seller after the buyer signs a note and the deed of trust, okay? Now, when the dust clears, okay, what I mean by that is when the transaction is all over, what happens is the buyer has title to the property now, or has a deed in his name, or he's the owner of the property after the dust clears. The next thing that happens is that the lender now has a lien in favor for the lender in the first positioning, which gives the lender a tremendous amount of power to foreclose in case the buyer defaults on the note. And go back to the general terms to learn what default is, or breach of contract, basically the same thing. If the buyer breaches contract on the note, the lender uses the deed of trust to foreclose on the property and sell it at the auction and recoup their investment. Okay? Now, and the third thing that's going to happen when the dust clears is that the seller is going to get cash or equity. Okay? Not always. Sometimes in the market that we just had, sometimes the sellers have to come out of money, 10, 15, 20 grand to sell properties. But theoretically, if everything's good, then three things that's going to happen when the dust clears is that the buyer will be the owner of the property, the lender has a lien on the buyer's property, and the seller has got the bling bling or the ching ching in his hand, and that's mission accomplished. Okay, so that's a traditional closing. Now what I'm going to do next is show you a diagram of how the closing is going to look like. And excuse me, guys, I'm not an artist or anything like that, nor do I claim to be, okay? So I'm just trying to make it as simple as possible, okay? So this is the buyer, okay, investor. So this is, in this scenario, this is you. All right? And then we're going to have a seller here with the house. All right? And what's going to happen is that you're going to do marketing to these sellers, and the seller's going to call you. So the seller's going to call you. And you start negotiating with the seller using the Mr. Investor seller questionnaires and some of the other strategies on how to negotiate, build rapport with the seller. Okay? And once the seller calls you, you and the seller are going to come to an agreement. Both of you, see, it's a mutual thing. And that's the great thing about a contract or agreement, is that it's mutual. People volunteer get into it. We don't put a gun to somebody's head. We don't force them to do stuff they don't want. No, guys, we don't do it like that. It needs to be a win-win situation. So the seller and you, the buyer, investor, are going to come to an agreement called the real estate contract or the real estate purchase agreement, and you guys are going to buy the property. All right, this is a traditional closing, guys, okay? And you're going to probably buy the property, let's assume, at the market level because you went to a realtor and you paid the MLS retail price. You didn't buy it at a discount. That's why it's called traditional. But it doesn't have to be. You could buy that property at 60% on the deal. It doesn't matter, but it's a traditional closing, okay? So now, you and the seller get into a contract, but you're just buying it traditionally, and the way it's going to work is you got to go get a loan. So you're going to go to your lender, the bank. You're going to go to the bank to get this money, okay? And because when you put this house on the contract, you're going to have to give the seller cash, okay? And what the seller's going to do for you, he's going to give you the deed or the ownership or the title of the property, but the seller's not going to give you the ownership unless you give him the dinero. And so you don't have the dinero because you're not a cash buyer or you decide not to use your money, so you have to go to a lender. So what's going to happen is before the lender gives you the cash, before the lender gives you the cash as the buyer, you got to do two things. We already discussed this, okay? Is that you as the buyer or the investor have to give the lender a note. You have to sign a promissory note, and you have to sign the deed of trust. Once you as the buyer sign the note and the deed of trust, the lender will give you the funds. And then once you have the funds, you're able to give it to the seller, okay? In return, the seller will give you the deed, all right? Now, what has happened is since you've given the deed to the deed of trust to the lender now has a lien in the first place under the county clerk's office, so we just call this the government to make things simple in the story. So, because you have given the house to the lender as security instrument, now the lender has a lien on your house, okay? But which is okay because you get the deed and you get the ownership of the property. If you don't perform, or with the note said actually with the lender, then they'll exercise their right. But as long as you keep binding to the contract, the lender has no power really over your property. This is your property, and that's the great thing about America, because a lot of other countries, you couldn't even own a property unless you had cash, guys, 100% cash, okay? So, now, this aspect, okay, or I'm sorry, not the call part, but the contracting, the money, the deed, the deed of trust, things of that nature, are all going to be happening at the escrow company. Okay, so this represents the escrow company, guys. All right. So in a nutshell, once you get the contract, give it to the escrow company. They do everything for you. You just show up to closing. All right. Now, once the seller gets his money, what happens normally is almost like 77% of all Americans don't own their house free and clear, so that means they have a loan. Only like 33% of Americans own their house free and clear. So the remaining 70+%, they have a lender. Okay? So the seller will have a lender. Okay? And because he didn't have the money when he bought the property himself. Okay? So what's going to happen is that once that cash goes in, majority of the cash is going to go to the lender minus cost of selling equals the seller's cash or equity. Okay? So the seller doesn't get all this money. The seller is going to get, the seller has to pay the lender or the bank and the cost of selling the house, which is the realtor cost, escrow, title policy, inspection repairs, things of that nature. And then, so he's going to have the remaining balance. So equity is once you pay the cost of selling your house, after you subtract your debt to buy the house, the remaining is called equity, okay? And that's what the seller takes, assuming that he has equity. And a lot of times, you know, when you buy a property subject to, they may not have equity, okay? So they might have to give us something. Or even when you sell traditionally, in the market, we just had, people didn't have equity. They would have to come out money out of pocket, or that's why they would go to foreclosure. They would do short sales because they didn't have 10, 20 grand to come to closing. Okay. Now, once the escrow company pays the lender is going to release the lien on this house because there is a lien on the property, and that's why you're able to buy it because, you know, once the lien is released. Okay. So just understand that there's a lot of scramble going on here, but just understand that a traditional closing or traditional sell, the seller's note gets cashed out and the buyer gives the seller cash, okay? And they cash out the loan, okay? In a subject to, this doesn't happen, okay? In a subject to, the buyer does not give the seller cash to pay off the lender. The lender note stays in place. We're going to continue with our discussion about traditional closing versus a subject to closing. Okay? I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give you an audio version definition and I'm going to give you a diagram definition so you can see actually both ways so you have a better grip, a better bite on the subject matter. Number one, we're talking about subject to. Okay? What happens is that the seller is going to convey or give you the title of the property. So you as the buyer or investor, you're going to own the property from day one. Okay? The next thing that's going to happen, in this case it's not going to happen at all, is that the seller's loan is not going to be paid off. Let me say that one more time. When the seller gives you the ownership of the property, you will not pay off his loan. You will not cash out his existing mortgage. You will not pay off his debt. Okay? So what that means is that you're just buying the property subject to is the seller's existing mortgage. You will not pay off his debt. Number three, the seller may get some cash or equity if he or she has equity. Okay? Sometimes they don't have equity. Sometimes they have equity. Okay? The point is, when the dust clears after the transaction of a subject to, three things will happen. The buyer will have the deed. The seller's loan stays in place and is not paid off. And the seller may get some cash or equity. Okay? Very simple. Now, let's dive into the diagram part. You're the investor or buyer. Okay? Here's the seller. You're going to do marketing. You're going to have to put time or money into marketing. And that's going to make the seller give you a call. So he's going to give you a call. Alright? Now once the seller calls you, you're going to start asking the seller Mr. Investor Seller Questionnaire form. That's going to determine motivation. And if you have any questions about that, please look over the previous videos that I have for you. But I'm making the assumption that you already know how to do this. So when the seller calls, you start negotiating, and you're going to put that house under contract with the seller. And the seller will agree to this contract. That's why he's coming meeting you in the middle. Okay? And when you put this on the contract's going to clearly say that you're going to buy this property subject to this existing underlying mortgage, that you will not cash out the seller's debt or loan. Okay? And the seller volunteers and agrees to that. Okay? So whenever you go to closing at the title company, okay, what's going to happen is that the seller will deed you ownership. Okay? So you're going to be the rightful owner of the property. Okay? And that's as simple as it gets, guys. Okay? Now, this part is called the escrow. Once the property is transferred to you, or the deed is transferred to you, the escrow company or your attorney, or if you're closing yourself, you're going to have to file with the government, or what I call the gov, but really it's the county clerk's office, to let the world know, put it on notice that you own this property over here. And so that will be done in escrow for you if you guys do it through escrow. Okay? If you do it yourself, then you know what I'm talking about already. But you can do it yourself, okay? I'll show you a video how to do that down the line, okay? So the main difference is on a subject to compared to a traditional closing is that the seller deeds you the property, but you never deed him or you never give him cash, okay? You don't do that, okay? On a traditional closing, that's what happens. So in a nutshell, this seller, when he bought this house, he didn't have money, and so he went to a bank. And this lender or bank has on this property a lien called deed of trust. I'm going to say DOT, deed of trust. Okay, so when you buy this property, you own the property, you become the owner of it. That first lien or that deed of trust does not get wiped off. It's still there. When you go to the county clerk's office, when you pull the chain of command ownership, you'll get to see that this deed is still there. I mean, the deed of trust is still there. So that lien is there. So just because you own the property doesn't mean that there's no liens on the property. You actually agreed to buy the property subject to its existing lien. So if you don't perform to the original note or the original contract, okay? Rally is a note, but it's basically the same thing, and it's an agreement that the seller made with the original lender. If you don't uphold the seller's original agreement with the original lender, then the lender will foreclose on the house, and it doesn't matter if you own the deed or not. Okay? But now, if that happens, it's very important you understand that. If you, as an investor buyer, default and not make the payments to the lender will foreclose on this house, which means that you will lose your investment, but more importantly, that the seller, okay, is going to get a bruise on their credit. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's very important that you guys understand that, because if you're taking over the seller's payments and you don't make the payments, the lender is going to come after the seller, not you. So it's very, very important that you understand that whenever you buy a property subject to, that the seller may convey or transfer the ownership of the property to a new buyer. However, the seller is not off the hook with the lender. It's very important that you understand that, okay? The seller is not off the hook with the lender, okay? Now, whenever you buy a property subject to, remember I told you one of the advantages was that you don't have to show proof of income or credit. Well, if somebody does a credit check on your social security number or your company's employee identification number, that liability or the note is not going to show up on your credit or your company's credit because it's showing up on the seller. And that's one of the advantages of buying subject to, is that you're not personally signing promissory note to lenders. Okay, what I do is I negotiate a non-recourse loan with the seller, which allows me or my companies not to be personally liable for the debt of the seller. And if I default, that the seller's remedy is basically to foreclose and take the collateral, which is in this case the property. So it's really not a subject to, but it's a wrap. But a wrap and a subject to are very similar. The only difference is in a wrap, you're giving the seller a remedy through a second deed of trust, okay, in a wrap. And I'll explain that in the wrap video, but just understand the difference between a wrap, the difference between a traditional and a subject to, okay? Closing. That in a traditional closing, the seller deeds you the property, you give the seller cash, and the on the line note gets cashed out, gets paid off, and the lender gets paid on the seller's side. On a subject to, the seller deeds you the property, you don't promise or you don't give the seller any money for him to cash out the lender, hit the seller's lender. All you tell the seller is, Mr. Seller, I will make monthly payments on your property and keep making them until I cash out X amount of years or when the loan retires. Just depends on what you negotiate, okay? I personally told the sellers that, hey, I don't have a crystal ball, so I cannot promise you when I'm going to cash out your loan because I don't know when the market is going to come up. Okay, especially if the house doesn't have equity, because if it had equity, they would sell it traditionally. So I'm not going to sell it when it doesn't have equity and come out thousands of dollars in my own pocket. But what I do promise them, and in writing multiple times, is that I will make their house payments month after month, rain or shine. So if the house is vacant, I'll be making payments. If the house is full or if somebody tore it up, I'm going to fix it and making payments. So I will make payments rain or shine. But I don't promise them that I'm going to cash out their loan in 3 years or 6 years or 30 years, okay? Because normally I negotiate, hey, till the loan retires. Now, I want to cash out the loan as soon as possible because I put a lot of money into these properties. I have skin in the game from closing costs to rehabbing to providing sellers concessions like a free move and things of that nature. So my interest is aligned with the sellers, that the seller wants to get the loan cashed out as soon as possible, and I want to do the same thing so I get my money back, my investment back, plus my profit, okay? Because when I put money into a property and cure the loan or make the back payments and pay for closing, I have a lot of skin in the game, and sometimes I want to get my money out, but the market just doesn't allow it. So I don't make a promise to the seller that, hey, I'm going to pay your house off in 3 years or 6 months or 6 years. What I tell them is, Mr. Seller, what I promise is I'll make the monthly payments, month after month, rain or shine. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know when the market's going to come up, and I don't know when I can cash out your loan. If you're not okay with the situation that I might cash out your loan in 3 weeks, I might cash out your loan in 3 days, I might cash out the loan in 3 months, 3 years, or it might be 30 years. If you're not okay with that, then we don't need to be doing this transaction, okay? Now, if the house has a lot of equity and the seller demands for me to close faster, then I will. But on a deal that is marginal equity, I'm taking all the risk. I'm not going to promise the seller anything that I can't, deliver, or I don't have control. Okay, I don't have control of the market. I don't have the control of the banks or lending money. So the only thing I have control over is to make the monthly payments, and that's what I promised the seller to do in writing, and I will make them rain or shine, no matter if I have nowhere to sleep. I'd rather go hungry and live in my car and keep my promises. That's just the kind of man I am. Okay, so I highly recommend you guys be with the same ethical values as investing, because you got to do what you say you're gonna do. Okay, so understand that just because you don't cash out the seller's loan and that your Social Security is not tied up with this loan, it doesn't mean you don't have responsibilities and obligation and ethical, moral statutes that you promised the seller. You promised the seller to make the monthly payments, and you got to do everything in your power and then some, and then go the extra mile to make sure you do that, guys. And that's why I told you in my other videos, holding property costs money. Sure, you can buy a property with no money, no credit, but you need cash, okay? Real estate is expensive. A small thing that breaks on a car might cost a couple $100 or a couple of thousand. Something in real estate is going to cost thousands of dollars, okay? Thousands, like 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, a lot more, okay? So understand that. Now, coming back, I did a quick explanation of what a traditional closing looks like. I did an explanation of what the subject to closing looks like. I give you an audio and I give you a diagram. Now, guys, this is a money-making strategy. You're able to go out there and use the strategy to wholesale deals like crazy. And I'll listen to the other videos. I'll explain to you how to monetize on subject to deals. Okay. So don't just sit there, guys. Life is about actions. It's not about how much you know. It's not about what kind of coach you have. It's not about what kind of book you read. It's not about the kind of membership you have. Let me give you a quick example, guys. I've been in fitness most of my life, and I've been working out. I've been physically active. And one thing I realized is that it doesn't matter if you have the best membership at the top gym, the most beautiful gym, the most luxurious gym, or if you're just working in your garage, or if you're just going outside and doing something, okay? The membership has no value. If you hire a personal trainer, he or she could be okay, he or she could be a superhero figure. That really has no value, okay? What really has value, what really makes things happen is you guys. You are what makes it happen for yourself through your actions. If you're an action taker, you're going to make things happen. For example, if you buy a membership to a gym and you don't know how to work out, but you go in there and just get on the treadmill and just do a little something and you YouTube some stuff, you're going to get results compared to somebody that goes to the best gym, pays hundreds of dollars membership fees, has a personal trainer, and they don't even show up, guys. They don't even take any action. And whenever they're there, they're half-assing. They're not giving it everything they got. So what I'm trying to tell you guys is you don't need all the education. I've already given you a tremendous amount of education. Go out there, take action, come back to me, and you're going to have specific questions that I'll answer for you. I will hold your hand and do it totally for free for you. Why? Because I want to make sure you succeed just like America has allowed me to succeed, okay? There's been people in my life that have helped me be where I am today, and I want to do the same for other people. I want to be an impact in your life. I want you to remember me 10, 20 years from now. I want you to tell your kids that, hey, I made an impact in your life 10, 20 years from now, even when I'm dead. Okay, and that's the great thing about America. That's the great thing about coaching. There's been coaches in my life that helped me be where I am today, and I just want to give back to you, okay? So, not to everybody, because I don't have time for everybody, but if you're the go-getter individual, you want to make it happen for yourself, man, you find the right coach. I'm your guy. So, go out there, take action. Stop reading. You don't need any more education. Just this strategy here could make you a lot of money. How much money? Depends on you. Depends on your burning desire, your drive. If you have this much drive, this much goals, this much burning desire, and you're not willing to sacrifice much, and that's what you're going to get out. If you're willing to do this much, that's what you're going to get out. If you're willing to do this much, that's what you're going to get out. So the more you sacrifice because of your why, the more rewards you're going to get. And it's not going to be quick, dude. This is not a magic pill. This is not a shortcut. This is not something you do like, I'll stop eating meat like the Atkins diet, or I'm going to stop eating carbs, or I'm going to, take this powder, or take this weight pill to get results. Life is not like that, guy. Life is through hard work. You got to realize it. No hard work, no fucking results, man. Very low results. If you hang with the herd, you're going to get the same results as the herd, okay? You don't want to be with the herd. You want to be by yourself. You want to be alone. You want to be focusing and having tunnel vision on where you're trying to go in life, because your why is big enough. So if you don't know why you're doing this, more than likely you're wasting your time, and I don't think you are. So go understand why your why is. You've already learned a lot from me, and go take action. Action is the key. This is Mike with Mr. Investor, the Real Estate Dojo. Don't listen to the naysayers. This is America. Make it happen for yourself.